Yes, ma'am. Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Um, I'm afraid I have an update regarding your husband's case. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, they should have told you. Detective Benson is no longer on the case. He unfortunately had a very legitimate family emergency, so they called me in. My name is Detective Tanner, and I do apologize, ma'am. They should have told you that I'd be taking over the case. Well, I understand that, ma'am. Detective Benson is an excellent detective, but I assure you, I am on his level. For example, I was the one who solved this case. Yes, ma'am, the case has been solved. We've found your husband. Um, no, ma'am, it's not what you think it is. No, ma'am, no. Ma'am, did you know that your husband's furniture business was struggling for money? Oh, you did not. I see. I see. Yes. I mean, it's understandable, ma'am. Your husband is an old-fashioned man. His job is to take care of his family, his children, his wife, um, and he does that through his discount furniture business. And your husband was at one point very successful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, don't worry about that. That's the automatic air freshener. Yes, I'm afraid I can't turn that off. There's a lot of things that I can't do, ma'am. Um, but getting back to this case, so you weren't aware that your husband was struggling financially. I see. I see. Well, yes, and I'm afraid well, I'm afraid that it's more than just a dry patch or whatever else it might be called in the discount furniture business. Your husband has actually been struggling for funds for several years upon years now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, you did notice there was a change in your husband's attitude, but you just chalked it up to stress. I see, I see. Well, no, ma'am, it was a lot more than just ordinary stress. Yes, I'm afraid that your husband was seriously contemplating selling the house in order to keep the business afloat. Yes, ma'am. Well, it's, as I said, your husband is a very old-fashioned man. I'm sure he felt shame over the fact that he couldn't provide for you and the children as well as he could several years ago. Oh, yes, ma'am. I did some checking. Your husband's business wasn't just in decline, it was failing. There were several creditors whom your husband had not paid. there were several suppliers whom your husband either had not paid or was paying them late, and they were rather upset with him. So, yes, ma'am, your husband was in some serious financial problems. Now, I want to talk to you about one of your husband's suppliers. Yes, a Mr. Edward Wilcox. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's a short, very bald man, wheezes a lot. Yes, yes. Um, he runs the lumber mill, and he actually owns it. And apparently, he was one of the individuals who wasn't too happy with your husband. Well, no, 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 ma'am. Hold on. It's not what you think. Well, there's more to the story than that. So, Mr. Wilcox knew that your husband was struggling financially. He approached him one day, had a very serious conversation with him. Oh, no, ma'am, he did not threaten your husband. He offered him a rather odd business proposal. Well, the truth is, ma'am, it was more of a con job than a business proposal. Apparently, he invited your husband over to his cabin in the woods. And, well, no, that's not his main residence, ma'am, but he invited him over to his cabin in the woods. And he pulled out a fake, counterfeit $20 bill, handed it to your husband, and told him, take a good look at it. You see anything interesting? Your husband probably said no. And then Mr. Wilcox told him, well, it's counterfeit, and it's the best counterfeit you'll see in your life. And then he told your husband that he knew that your husband was struggling financially and that the situation was extremely severe. And Mr. Wilcox offered him a fantastic option. He said he knew someone, a professional counterfeiter, who could make counterfeit $20 bills good enough to pass inspection by the best experts out there. So, Mr. Wilcox told your husband to take that counterfeit $20 bill to the bank and to make up a story about a customer coming into his furniture store, buying a small item and paying for it with that $20 bill, and that your husband suspected it might be counterfeit, so he brought it to the bank and let them examine it, see what they say. And well, ma'am, that's exactly what your husband did. He took that counterfeit $20 bill to the bank, made up some sort of story about a customer coming in, buying something small, paying for it with that $20 bill, and that it didn't seem quite right to him, and that your husband was afraid it might be a fake. And so the bank teller took a look at it, thought it was real, called over the bank president. Bank president took a look at it, said, "Looks real to me." And then they called over the oldest employee they had at the bank, someone who used to work at the Secret Service, someone who could instantly tell even a fantastic fake from the real thing. They called him over, and he examined it very closely, and he told your husband, "No worries, it's the real thing." And meanwhile, this entire time, your husband is thinking it's a counterfeit, and he's amazed. And that's when the greed sets in. That's when the desperation sets in. And he goes back to Mr. Wilcox, and he says, "Wow, you were right. No one could tell that this was a counterfeit." And then Mr. Wilcox offers him a deal, one that's a little too good to be true, but also too good to pass up. All your husband has to do is take out $200,000 real money and then bring that real money with him. And Mr. Wilcox will drive him to where the counterfeiter is. And the counterfeiter, well, he's a paranoid individual. No matter how good his fakes are, he wants to trade real money for his counterfeits. Your husband brings $200,000 in real money, and the counterfeiter gives him $2 million in fake money. Expert counterfeits, just as good as that $20 bill. Now, it took your husband quite a bit of time to get that $200,000. He ended up having to take out a couple of very questionable loans from a couple of very questionable people to raise a good chunk of that $200,000. So he brought the money in cash with him, met with Mr. Wilcox, and Mr. Wilcox drove him to the abandoned shack deep into the woods. Only there was no counterfeiter. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is never easy. But when I said that this case was solved, and maybe I should have told you sooner, but we found your husband's body. Ma'am, please, I know this is a very traumatic moment for you. But ma'am, considering how much time has gone by from when this happened and we found the body and solved this case, you can't be too surprised, can you? You knew this was a very real possibility. And I do apologize for not telling you sooner. But I just thought you would want to know the circumstances of what took place." "Oh, no, ma'am. I'm not saying your husband was a scumbag. I'm saying he was desperate. There are some women out there who they find out that their husband can no longer provide them with financial stability. They find out that their husband failed in his job to provide They find out their husband's business failed miserably, they leave him. And ma'am, after we finished questioning Mr. Wilcox, it was very clear that your husband loved you and the children you had with him very much. He was scared of losing it all. Losing a business is one thing, losing a house or a car is one thing, but losing your entire family as a man because your business went under, well, ma'am, that is something else. I understand. Your husband had no reason to worry about that. But money changes people, and a lack of money sometimes also changes people. No, ma'am, no, I'm not questioning your fidelity to your husband. Absolutely not. But as I said, we found him. Oh, well, that's the thing, ma'am. There never was a counterfeiter. There never was a special magical process or machine created by a counterfeiter that could make money that looked and felt real. There was never a counterfeiter. There was never a counterfeit money-making magical machine. None of it. Basically, Mr. Wilcox tricked your husband into bringing $200,000 of money with him, handing it over to Mr. Wilcox. And then Mr. Wilcox, well, I won't get into the details, but he took your husband's money, and he also took his life, unfortunately. Yes, ma'am. This was just a scam, a horrible scam, and all the way from the beginning, Mr. Wilcox planned on ending your husband's life. He couldn't leave him alive. Your husband would just go and tell the police that Mr. Wilcox stole the money from him. Well, ma'am, it would have been very easy for your husband to say that he was struggling financially and that Mr. Wilcox claimed that he had a guaranteed moneymaker investment opportunity for your husband. That's what your husband could say. And, an investment opportunity that is very likely guaranteed to make money sounds a lot more plausible than what? Mr. Wilcox saying that your husband was greedy and in on a counterfeiting scheme? Where's the evidence? People would believe your husband. The police would believe your husband, not Mr. Wilcox. Your husband has a much better reputation than Mr. Wilcox. Well, yes, Mr. Wilcox has been part of the community for over a decade, but honestly, his business was in worse shape than your husband's. Oh, yes, ma'am, much worse. We checked the financial records. This was a way for Mr. Wilcox to get $200,000 and alleviate the problem at his business. But unfortunately, like I said, he couldn't leave your husband alive. It was always part of his plan. Trick your husband into giving him $200,000, end his life, bury the body, and now all of a sudden, Mr. Wilcox has $200,000 free and clear. Oh, the counterfeit $20 bill that so easily passed inspection and everyone said it was real. Ma'am, there was no counterfeit $20 bill. That's right, there never was a counterfeit $20 bill. The $20 bill was real. That's why everyone who looked at it at the bank said it was real, because it was real. Mr. Wilcox just used it as a prop to convince your husband to go along with the con. I'm sorry, ma'am. I know you're feeling, well, I'm not gonna lie, I can't imagine what you're feeling. But at least you know what happened. I know it's been a long time, but at least now you know what happened to your husband. Yes, ma'am, he did not leave you. I'm very sorry for your loss.